Will be probably in my opinion, a very good testing flow goes like this. At discovery phase, before you implement a feature, we do some exploratory tests. We run our BDD scenarios, and I will talk a bit more about each of them in detail. Good morning. Welcome to Flutter Heroes 2023. My name is Teresa, and I'll be talking about testing today. So first thing in the morning, we talk about testing. Awesome. If that's always something we do at work, that'll be brilliant. So as you can see here, I have Flutter Testing Cookbook 2.0. I'm not providing a library, but I have actually done similar talk before, which my talk was designed to talk about how we do testing around while we have a bug fix. But today, what I will cover is I'm going to widen this context of talk about how we do testing of a product lifecycle. So I'll blend testing in a product lifecycle. I will not only talk about how we do tests, showing some code examples, right? That's not only thing I will do. I will also talk about what we should test at what stage of this product. So hope you're enjoying it. Right, so yeah, as I was saying, the journey today, in the next 30, 40 minutes, you're gonna hear me talk about how we create the bugs. I guess we do, right? Every time we create code, create the features, at the same time we invent the bugs. So, but how can we preventing it, right? How can we preventing bugs from coming back? And in the end, I will also give you some extra bonus, maybe some of the testing that you don't actually do usually or daily, but it would be nice to have. Right. So, actually my screen, I need to stand a bit to the side so I can see my screen. Sorry. I hope you can still hear me. Okay, great. So, how bugs are invented? I think as a developer, we probably see this every day. We have our own stories of how bugs are invented, right? But a very simple example here, something I've seen myself before, not I'm the part of the bug invention process, but I've seen it. So we have this feature to create onboarding process. The iOS team, they assume that in the email address, we can use plus sign. Sorry, the iOS team assume plus sign the email address is invalid. They implement the feature, they run the unit tests, everything was fine. So the code is merged. At the same time, Android team think, wait, hold on, the plus sign for email address is actually valid, right? I'm going to accept it. That's how we can test Gmail, for example. So I'm going to accept plus sign. I run my unit tests, everything's fine. My code is then merged. So everything went to production. And what happens is the user who register on Android using plus sign in the email address, they can't log in from iPad or any iOS device. What a disaster. So then this leads to the next question of how we should do our tests. Is unit test good enough, right? So here, will be probably in my opinion, a very good testing flow goes like this. At discovery phase, before you implement a feature, we do some exploratory tests. We run our BDD scenarios, and I will talk a bit more about each of them in detail. And once we've done our discovery with everyone in the team, we then move on to integration. So integration here doesn't mean integration tests. It's where we actually merge our code back to the main branch, to the integration process. And then in this stage, we will cover unit tests, something we are very familiar with, and acceptance tests and integration tests. Here we run the flow from BDD to TDD, right? And again, you don't have to do TDD all the time, but it's just nice to have. And from there, we go into the release process. Here in release, we look after our UI a bit more. We do some end-to-end tests. We do some snapshot tests or any other tests that you want to cover in the release process, regression or bit manual as well, accessibility, for example. And something a bit extra in the end is recommended, right? We can think about API tests, contract tests, and another big topic nowadays, accessibility tests. So let's move on. Before we dive into tests, right? So here's another thing that might have some impact on how you do tests. The reason I'm saying this is depending on what Git branching model you are using. So for example, if you are following a Git flow, right? And most likely if you are building a mobile application, very likely you are following Git flow or maybe scaled chunk, right? It's very difficult to use purely chunk for mobile application development because our app deployment relies on, it's a bit out of our hand. We need to have this release branch, run some manual tests, and then deploy the application to the App Store. And this process is actually out of our control. So very likely, you're probably using Git flow. That means you have your develop branch, your integration branch, and you have a separate release branch or even hotfix branch. But at the same time, you might follow in the scale chunk base. You just ever merge to the same branch, and you have a very short-lived release branch for you to release your product. So which Git branch model you are using might have some impact on your testing flow. This depends on whether or not you have a long release process. So, right, and you can see how we actually blend this back to the testing process a bit later. So let's start with discovery. This is actually what we do before we start implementing our feature. And this exploratory testing is something that not every team or company does, right, from my own experience. This one is a bit manual-ish. It's not a part of our testing automation. It's about we actually focus testing as a thinking process, as a thinking activity. It's actually manual because automation does have its limit. Can it predict? Can it make suggestions? Can it refine? Or can it collaborate? If you think at some point your automation test doesn't cover everything you need, maybe do some exploratory testing. It would be, for example, before I start implementing a very big feature, like a payment, right? For example, you can have 2 people from the team sitting on the side. One from the test engineering team, one from maybe products, and from the engineering team as well. Think about how we can break the application, how we can actually break this feature, put down all these edge scenarios, and that will be something you can cover later when you design this feature. So it's about the process of you design, you execute, you analyze, and you learn together. So yeah, this actually, I'm not sure if you tried it, but if not, definitely recommend it to spend like this process roughly for a big feature. It would probably take a whole morning to do. There are some steps you can try, some scripts you can follow, but from this process, you actually understand more about what you want to implement. And move on from exploring tests, we can then go on to BDD, behavior-driven development. So for audience who are in this room, how many of you have tried it or used it before? Awesome. Yeah, nice, great. Right, so what is BDD, right? You might actually confuse with, we have BDD, we have TDD, we have ATDD, and we also have DDD. So BDD is actually designed after TDD. So Agile actually invent TDD first, but later on they actually starting to promote behavior-driven development as a way to enhance, as a way to help people do TDD better. So it was later that actually BDD and the TDD, they actually work very nicely together. So it's enhanced TDD, it's a process of Agile, and it requires team collaboration between tech people and non-tech people. And I'm going to talk a bit more about BDD in the next few slides. So what do we do in BDD, right? So BDD is actually a part of this whole testing family. It connects with TDD, and it's about having a feature request from your product owner, and we run some activities, some discovery phase with 3 amigos in your team. That's what we call example mapping, and I will show you actually example of example mapping. And this move on to implementation. That's where we can actually starting to write our features, write our tests, then we can create our pull requests. So let's see what happens, right? So I'm going to follow this flow from a feature to example mapping to implementation until we can submit a PR. So now let's say when a feature arrives in a old fashion or in a way without implementing doing BDD, what happens usually is we have our product owner or feature developer. They will be the one creating stories for us, and they will explain these stories to our engineering team by having a meeting or just send you the link of the tickets, say, read it, right? Try to understand it. So they explain these stories to our engineering team, and engineering team, they will take the story and provide us estimations, right? Either by t-shirt size or animal size or anything, and talk about what is the edge case here and what should we do. But following the BDD process, what happens is that, again, the product owner will be the one create the stories, not us. But instead of read the story, read information, we will actually discover this whole feature together. And after the discovery, engineers, right, maybe it's the product team or the QA testing engineer, any engineer in a team, they will be the one write down the scenarios in the tickets. So the flow of BDD goes like this. We discover a story, and in the backlog, we're starting to write down all the user acceptance criteria. And we run example mappings with 3 amigos. Those 3 amigos means at least we need 1 person from the product, 1 person from the testing engineering team who knows how we can break the application, and 1 person from the development team. So 3 amigos. And we do the example mapping together, and then we will turn this example mapping from some sticky notes into gherkin scenarios. And how do we do it, right? In the discovery phase, I'm sure you are all familiar with this, right? We got the tickets, and the story goes like, as a user, I want the font size to increase, and I can append it to some alphabet after the text. And I want to say more content, right? So let's say if that's the story we want to implement. So the user is the person who requires this function, and action is the step that we need to follow, and the value is what this feature adds to the product. So following the step, so we understand now this is the feature we are going to implement. And then we take these tickets, we arrange a meeting, either it's a discovery meeting. Usually this one might run depends on how many stories you want to talk about in one session. It can go from 1 hour to 3 hours. Deep breath, it's okay. So in this 3 amigos meeting, we will find out a bit more. Like we will throw question in, try to, the PO will try to answer questions. We'll try to think about all these features and all these cases we should test, something but we probably wouldn't even think of in that kind of depth without having everyone, all the brain, in one room. So we talk about this discovery phase, this 3 amigo meeting. What is actually happened in this meeting is we're going to use a lot of post-it notes, or even be more environment friendly. There are so many tools you can use online. So as you can see on the screen, there are different colors for different stickers, right? The color actually have their own meanings in a way. In the beginning of this meeting, the PO will write down the story, the feature we want to implement in a yellow sticker and put on top of the screen. So at first, you will see a blank page of a screen. And the rule is what we want to actually break the feature down into smaller pieces. And we start from rule 1 and move on to the end of the rule. And our rule here, right, is something that I recommend is if you notice for a story, if you have, let's say, for example, more than 10 rules, that means this story is just too big. It's already a good indicator here that you need to break this story down into multiple stories. So let's work on rule 1, right? For example, if we're saying the feature here is to increase the font size, and the rule number 1 is it has to be visible on screen. It doesn't matter how big the font size is, I want that to be visible on screen. This is where now the engineer and test engineer will starting to talk and put down real examples here. Examples who are valued and examples who are invalued. And the example here, as data, we will actually convert them back into testing data when we run our BDD tests, acceptance tests later on. And you will see how we can transfer all the data here into tests case afterwards. So here, the information here is not like something we put and just waste it. Once we've done our rule 1, we move on to rule number 2. And another indicator here is if you notice, right, your example goes on and on and on a lot. For example, if the rule 1 is to implement a feature of validation email without using a library, the example for email validation can go on and on and on for like maybe over 100 of examples. If you think that there are too many examples for one rule, it's another good indicator saying this is actually probably too complicated. We need to slice it down. And then you see probably some notes on the right side, right? Those are red, and what it means, right? During this process, in this thinking process, this breaking things down process, there might be questions, right? And maybe those questions are something the PO is able to answer you straight away. So you take this question out. But there might be some questions that the PO was like, you got me. Right? I don't have answer for you right now, but I will take it back and I will think about it. So here he will put a note on the right side in red to remind himself that's something I need to answer. So all the questions will be noted in this process as well. It will not be forgotten. Another recommendation here is if you have too many questions during this example mapping process, it's again a good indicator saying this story is not ready. There are too many unknown, too many things is unpredictable. So let's put this story back to backlog until we sort everything out first. So let's not rush into implementing this story. So if we done this process, as I show you how we invent bugs in the beginning with the email plus sign, we will not run into the same error for sure. Right, so here is the data we collect with the rules and questions and examples, right? And how do we do with it? Now we go into user acceptance tests in a BDD process. Here in this process, you will most likely test, I would recommend you test only the business logic, right? Not UI. Although you can apply BDD in a UI and in end-to-end tests as well, because BDD just is a framework, it's a process, right? It's not actually a testing tool. So as in development process, when we do integration, our code back to the main branch, if you are following Git flow, not trunk-based development, that means every time you merge your code, you don't release it. Here, I would highly recommend to just test business logic. So after discussing our features, right, they will come to like a joint agreement on the behavior of this feature. What does it do? What do we do when there's an error, and how do we handle success? And at this stage, we should understand a bit more about the feature and the outcome of the discovery phase as well. And then we can turn everything into user acceptance tests in your tickets in a Jira backlog. And why do I mention Jira? I will show you later of how we can connect, again, your code with Jira and you end up having a very nice live document as well. So in the image, you will see a very high-level view of how you can actually transfer the data you got from the previous session into a Jira ticket, right? These are just like a very high-level brief view of Jira board. And once we've done all that, now let's start implementing the feature. I think we're ready, right? So we can start implementing the feature, doing unit tests and acceptance tests, or integration, however you like to call it. And here, we actually will run the TDD flow. So we're still in the BDD process, but we've done the behavior already. Now we are thinking about testing. And maybe, right, for people who hasn't done BDD before, you might or might not familiar with Gherkin syntax. So Gherkin is actually a language that is designed to be written in a way that everyone can read, everyone can understand. It's a pure English, pure text. It's kind of in between a human language and a code language. It follows structures like this, right? Given is like a condition. So given, for example, the mission is to get things done right. Everything that you see in bold are the keywords for Gherkin scenarios. And you can continue giving a bit more context for the given situation. You can use the word and. And we want to avoid create tag debt for the future self. And when is where the action was triggered. If we are thinking about code, when is here we actually create or call a function and waiting for the result of it. So when is here, for example, is when we're working with new features, right? We trigger a function here, and then is we starting to test the result of our function. Then we use BDD, for example. As we transfer this into Flutter, right? So in Flutter, if you are using multi-package monorepo or monolith, in your lib module or in your package level module, let's say I have this package called design, right? And in here, let's create a new folder. We call it test driver, and underneath it, you have every Gherkin tests you might need and acceptance tests you might need for that feature that you're implementing. So you can group everything together in a test driver folder, having the green thing you can see as a cucumber is the Gherkin syntax. That file goes into the feature file and ends with .feature. And your tests, actually what you do in your test cases goes into the steps. So this is a high-level view of what your project might look like if you are using Gherkin and acceptance tests. And what do we do in a Gherkin file? So there's a very nice library that you can download for Flutter, and actually it covers most of the front-end project. The Cucumber, this is a framework you can use for Gherkin. And once you download the library and implement it into your project, you can create this file called something.feature, and you will see the Cucumber green icon on your file. And we will then look, if you remember what we've done in an example mapping session, this is where we copy, paste all the data from there to here. The feature is the story, and the scenarios is what we want to implement as in each rule. And then we're starting to write down the given conditions and what we want to test in the then conditions, what we want to verify, what we want to validate. And this file might actually go on to over 100 of lines, depends on how many scenarios you want to cover for this feature. For example, for a feature of making a payment or validate the payee information, this feature file might contain a lot of information. And the reason we want to use a framework here is because we actually connect what we write down here in a Gherkin scenario back in our tests in a very nice way. So what we write down here is what we're going to test. And how do we do it? We will connect this file with our tests. So remember what you put down here in all these as keywords. You need to copy exact same word from here to your test cases. Otherwise, it probably will not be recognized. So here we run into the cycle of TDD because we have our test cases written, but we haven't implemented them yet. But we write them down nicely here. We know what we want to test, what a feature we want to implement, and what might break this feature. We write down everything here, and then we're starting to implement the features. So I would highly recommend we test in this file. Sorry, and let me go back to the previous slides. In these steps, this is acceptance tests step, ATDD. We cover just the business logic. And we can do BDD again in end-to-end tests, but while we implement our feature, let's just concern about the state of the application, the logic, right? Not in the UI level because it's too heavy to run. So if you are doing clean architecture, what you can test here is up to the level of a use case, right? Before it goes to presentation. If you use libraries or anything, right? I would say just concern about the state of the app, right? What triggers an error, what triggers a success, but don't test the UI here. I think people making, I wouldn't say a mistake, but just different ways of doing things, right? We test here, like say for example, a good example would be the state shows an error, then instead of saying, the test result is I pop up a dialog of error, that's UI. I can say I test the state here is showing an error. That should be good enough, right? We don't want to actually concern UI here. And why do I mention about Jira in the beginning is actually Jira has this nice integration. When you're doing BDD, you can actually run this command to connect your code with Jira. And what happens in the end, in your backlog, in your board, you will have this session called live documentation. This will contain all your working scenarios for the feature. So in the future, if some other team wanted to update the feature or refactor or maybe doing something different, expanding from your feature, they can come back to these tickets here and look at what you've been implemented and what other cases you cover here. So it will be something quite nice for your app to be upgraded in the future. What? Oh, right, I probably have to go a bit quicker. So this way you can see that we're running the flow from BDD to TDD. And I can talk a bit more about TDD here, because what we've done just now is to test the state of the app, the business logic. But that's not enough, because we haven't talked about unit tests yet. So what are unit tests, right? There are different cases you can do in unit test, either by mock, by fake, or stop, or inject. I'm not going to read everything here line by line, but you can have my slides afterwards. So there are different type of ways to create this test data. And of course, as Flutter library, it provides you lots of nice functions. You can run your tests. You don't have to use any other libraries, right? You have everything underneath one hood, which is awesome. And so component tests is actually different from end-to-end tests. Component test is actually unit test, but for a piece of UI component. We test individual widget in isolation, and we can run tests with mock data as well. So this one is actually not end-to-end tests. It's not even an integration test. It just tests UI pieces one by one in isolation. So once we done our BDD, TDD, unit test, component test, in the integration process, we cover how we can actually merge our code now, right? I think everything is covered nicely. We can merge back our code to the main branch. Now, eventually, if we are running sprint, right, like say every 2 sprints, at the end of that sprint, we cut release branch and we release our application. And then we run into the release mode. And here we will cover end-to-end tests and some regression tests. And the pipeline of automation goes like this, right? I'm sure you guys use CI/CD. If not, you have to do this manually. So the integration, that means merge code back to the main branch, should roughly run 15 to 20 minutes. This is why I wouldn't recommend to do UI tests at integration level, because this one will take a bit longer. It can actually last 40 minutes, for example. So if you cover just business logic, you should have a very nice, tidy integration branch to merge your code back. And release branch might run a bit longer. This is SSD. Because of the end-to-end tests and the UI tests, this one might last 40 minutes or even an hour, which is fine, because you run the full test of all, the full process of all the tests. And at the end, we have another branch called the deployment branch. This will actually grab the code, sign it, and deploy it to the App Store. So again, I'm going to talk a little bit about end-to-end tester here. It's the flow of running all the widget tests together. You will need an emulator and a device, and it's quite expensive to run. And of course, Flutter provides you all these package and the functions you will need to do end-to-end tests, integration tests, and unit tests, right? So, and I'm sure you know how to do them already. You probably know much, much better than I do. And another type of test during another type of tests during release is regression tests. It's in between manual and automation. And basically what happens is during release process, and if you found a bug, someone fixed the bug and merge this bug fix back to the release branch, this action will trigger rerun of all tests. And this is a process what we call as regression tests, to make sure what we invent this time doesn't break the feature we invent last time. And a little bit extra here. How many of you have used a contract test before? No? Okay. This is actually a little bit different from API tests. It's actually a collaboration between your backend team and your frontend team. It's to make sure that any breaking API change wouldn't break the app. Maybe you haven't used contract testing before, but I'm sure you run into the scenario of having app released in App Store, and eventually the app starting to crash, not because of front-end bug, but the back-end have deployed a breaking change, which you're not aware of. So this is what contract testing can help to prevent this happening. So in the front-end side, we do contract testing as we do as for any other unit test, but we can use this library called a pact. We actually test API function here, API behavior in the front-end, without actually calling the actual API. And the test result of the front-end project will be uploaded to this middleman called a broker. And this broker will actually use our test result and transfer it to our backend team. At the same time, the backend team, who is called the provider, they will actually do the similar test cases as well. But every time when they do a breaking change or they change the API, they will run the tests against our test result. And if they break our front-end project, this error will be detected at a very, very early stage. So they will either implement in the feature or at least make sure we're actually aware of this change, and we can make the change again, adapt it to other front-end project. So this process is actually what we call as a contract test. It's a contract signed by the backend team and front-end team in the middleman called the broker. So again, if you are very like myself, diving a lot in the release process, you might want to implement the caching as well in the testing process. This means you actually test only the impacted area. A nice way to actually do caching is when you have a monorepo project, but with multiple libraries, with multiple packages. You can cache the test result of each module. And in this way, when you have, like, for example, one line of code change in one library, it actually tests all the relevant libraries associated with So for example, you have 80 modules, and you change one line of code in the top node, level of your node. You don't have to test everything underneath it. But if you change one line of code in the root level, in a share package, you want to test again everything that implement this library only. So using caching, it actually improves the efficiency and the more effectiveness of your tests. And now I think we actually, when we build out and design our product, we want to build it and design it in a way that is all-inclusive, not while we're actually having a feature and we try to adapt it to a minor group, but we want to have this design in our mind before we even think about our product, right? Having this all-inclusiveness design process. So we provide accessibility. At the same time, we also want to think about automate accessibility tests as well. At the moment, for libraries I've been using for front-end product, this is actually something that we haven't done enough comparing to many other tests areas. So navigation and screen focus is still something we try to fight with during accessibility testing and accessibility function design process. Right. So this almost like last slides of my talk. A little bit summary, right? So unit tests provide you lower confidence, but at the same time, it's lower maintenance costs as well. Widget test and end-to-end test provide you higher confidence, but end-to-end test is actually quite expensive to run. So thank you for coming for my talk. And if you have any questions, and